All right, in Chapter 9, we are going to be discussing performance management and appraisal. This has a lot to do with monitoring how employees are doing, finding ways to improve performance, letting them know what their performance is like, and then finding ways to move them forward and make them into better employees. There's a lot of different ways to approach this, and we're going to discuss some of them, is not only how to do it, but also some of the ways to avoid some of the faults in doing it. The learning objectives that we're going to do are describe the appraisal process for one. Number 2 is define performance management and discuss how it differs from performance appraisal. These are a little bit different concepts, and we'll go over those. Number 3 is develop, evaluate, and administer at least 4 performance appraising tools. Number 4, explain and illustrate the problems to avoid in appraising performance. Number 5, perform and evaluate appraisal interview. And number 6, explain how to segment employees for appraisal and reward purposes. All right, so first part is describe the appraisal process. The appraisal process is a way to give people feedback, not only on a one-time scale, but continuously throughout the employment process, and find ways to help manage their performance so that we can get more out of them and set the standards where we need them to be. So the performance appraisal process steps. Step number 1 is set work standards. As we've talked about in chapters past, one of the big things that we need to do is we need to set our standards so we know where we're starting from. Set that benchmark. That way everybody is aware of exactly what they need to do in order to achieve success. The second thing you need to do is then also assess the performance based solely on those standards that were already set up. If you try to assess somebody differently than the standards you have, they're not going to be they're not going to live up to your expectations just because they were trying to meet the other standards. There's a rule of thumb in most of management is that you get what you measure. If you focus on high quality products, you may get high quality products, but it may slack on how many they're able to do at a time. If you focus on cutting costs, revenues may start to fall, but the costs will go down. So you get what you focus on. So if you're not focusing on things that are outside the realm of the employee's standards, they're not going to live up to those higher expectations in those ways. And they also know exactly what they have to do to meet it. And then also step 3 is to provide feedback to the employee. After we've reviewed them, then we have to actually talk to them about it so that they know where they're succeeding, they know where they're lacking, and they know of what steps they need to take moving forward in order to improve that success. We do performance management and appraisal for 5 different reasons. The first one is the most obvious, and that's used for pay, promotion, and retention decisions. Oftentimes, a lot of people only receive an appraisal whenever it comes to the end of the year and there's a potential year-end raise. That's the only time that they hear about how they are performing. So you have an entire year that it has been ignored, and only once a year do you actually get that feedback of how well you're doing. So you could have been doing something that you didn't know was wrong for the entire past year and never even knew about it until that one time comes up. So it's important to do it for more than just these 3 different reasons, such as the next one, links performance management to company goals. If we are aware of these connections, we appraise people to make sure that they're living up to their goals. If it's only based on pay, they're only going to focus on pay. If they're living up to certain goals that have been set up, they're going to strive for success in the goals. The third reason is the manager can correct deficiencies and reinforce strengths. This helps the employee to know what they're doing wrong and what they're doing right. It gives the manager an opportunity to point these out, hopefully in a non-confrontational way, and know how to motivate the employee to make corrections, while also at the same time the employee knows what they're doing right, so they know what they can continue to do and continue to be successful in. The fourth reason is with appraisals, employees can review career plans. Oftentimes, we will set up career plans for an employee, and at certain times we need to continue to review these. Sometimes these are career plans within the organization. I've even set them up sometimes that expecting an employee to leave the organization, and that's all right. For the simple fact of it will show your employee that you care about them, that you care about their success, even if it's not with the company that you're working for. I just saw a new slogan for McDonald's, for instance. They are now striving to be the best first job someone can have. So that's their intention, is to focus on a first job with every expectation of you moving on. Does that mean that they're intentionally pushing people out the door? No. It just means that they want to support people to continue on their career, whether it's with McDonald's or not. And then number 5, training needs are identified. If you are having a discussion with an employee and you say, well, this performance measurement, maybe your speed needs to come up a little bit, maybe the employee can come back with, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to move in or perform with that efficiency. So they can come back, okay, maybe we need to retrain this person, or maybe we need to train things differently. Maybe they were never trained correctly on how to do something, so they can't do it right. If it's a quality issue, maybe they weren't taught the quality way to do it. So it addressed the issue of, okay, now we have to step back and figure out how we train this better. Okay, so a review of what we just talked about. Oftentimes, the biggest reasons for appraisals are pay and promotions. I don't know of very many companies that don't do some form of appraisal process whenever we're talking about pay. Just because people want to be able to justify their reasons for their payments. If you didn't get a raise one year, why didn't I? If you gave somebody a raise, why did you give them a raise? Things like that we have some backing for the decisions we make. We can use it for planning for the future and pushing employees in a certain direction, whether it be on their career or in developing in the company. Which goes into the next one, where it's career planning. We want people to succeed. The more they succeed, the more we're going to succeed. So we can use an appraisal process to also fill in the gap of, are they where they need to be in order to develop their career? If they want to be a manager someday, maybe we start giving them some management tasks and see how they perform, and then we appraise them on them. Training and development, like I said, about if we're training somebody for a manager, or even if we see that there's training that is missing, we can use these appraisal processes to find those holes. If everyone in an entire department is lacking on one particular thing, maybe we should see that as a sign that maybe we need to retrain the entire department, or maybe they never were to begin with. Ongoing feedback, which is something we're going to be talking about a little bit more here whenever it comes to performance management. It's more than just a yearly review to go over the last 12 months. It should be an ongoing process. And then finally, teamwork and change. Teamwork is oftentimes one of those things that comes up a lot throughout the appraisal process, because we want people to be able to work as a team as opposed to a collection of individuals. And we also can use this appraisal process as a tool for change. maybe we can see where things are lacking, or we can show people that this is the direction that we're going in now. We can use that tool in a way to reevaluate how things are so we can initiate change. So we have defined performance management and discuss how it differs from performance appraisal. Like I said, these are two distinctly different things. Appraisal is part of performance management, but they are different things. Performance management definition: the continuous process of identifying, measuring, developing performance of individuals and teams, and aligning performance with the organization's goals. One thing that I want to point out right at the beginning of this, it says the continuous process. Unlike most appraisal processes or appraisal systems that are only done once or twice a year, performance management is all of the time. We should always be looking for opportunities to help our performance. So whether it's just correcting how things are getting done, whether it's changing how things are done in a continuous manner, we do this all year round, not just once or twice. So first thing we need to do is identify what performance we're actually looking at. If we're looking at quality, we address that as one of our goals, one of the things we're striving for. We figure out different ways to measure it. We have lots of metrics within a company. How many products did somebody put out? How many service calls did they fill? How many customers returned the product? Things like that. We have all kinds of numbers to show different things. And we should ultimately, that's how we're reviewing people, is we should have a way to measure it, and then we go by that measurement to know how successful they are. Developing performance in individuals and performance of individuals and teams. We should ultimately be looking at how are we going to continuously improve these individuals and these individuals of teams. It should never be a one-off that we're only looking at performance once a year. And then finally, aligning performance with the organization's goals. Just like we've talked about many times before, everything from the top down should all point to the goals at the top, that strategy that we set forth. We should make sure that the performance we're looking at meets with that strategy. Performance management, there's 6 elements. The first one is direction sharing, which means communicating company's goals throughout the company and then translating them into doable department, team, and individual goals. Just like I was talking about before, we should have a universal strategy that everything we do within a company points to that strategy and relays the intent of that strategy so everybody is working in the same direction, which goes along with same with the goal alignment. The goals of the company should relate to the goals of the individual. These shouldn't be opposite directions, and all of the individual's goals contribute to the main goal of the company. Ongoing performance monitoring, like I said, this should not ever be once a year. We should be watching how things are going constantly. That way we know how things are going. We can catch on to trends early. We can try to make corrections before it becomes problems. Maybe it just becomes an annoyance that could potentially build into something major. Let's cut it off early by monitoring it constantly. And as we're monitoring constantly, we should also be providing feedback constantly. That way we can correct things early, get the ball back where it's supposed to be. That way people aren't shocked at the end of the year, be like, I've observed you doing this wrong all year long, but I'm only telling you now. Coaching and development support. We as managers should be coaching and helping people to develop as people, as employees, as career-minded individuals. That way they can become more successful and we can become successful together. And then also recognition and rewards. Recognition is one of the easiest things to boost not only self-esteem, but to boost motivation within an organization because it's free. Recognition does not require any money, but it's a major motivator for a lot of people. And we should be able to give that out relatively openly. Rewards, sometimes we have to balance rewards because a lot of rewards cost money. But at the same time, when it's appropriate, we should give those rewards out as well. Information technology supports performance management. We should be able to go through and assign financial and non-financial goals. Sometimes we could put together specific numbers. How many products do we need you to produce a day? How many products do you need to sell in a month? You often call quotas in a lot of companies and things like that. We should be able to strive for specific numbers, whether it be financial or non-financial, because these are going to be different ways that people are going to be able to perform. Obviously, we can't put a dollar figure specifically on quality of a product, but we could measure it with something as far as how many customers returned it, what are the reviews like on these products, and things like that. We should inform all employees of their goals. Sometimes us as managers, we need to assign goals to people. And this isn't always a bad thing, that we give them goals in order to achieve. We should tell the employees what their goals are, or we should discuss it with them of how they want to develop their own. Sometimes we will tell other employees of the goals of each other in order to motivate people to do better. We could use IT-supported scorecard software. And this basically just helps us track the metrics that we were talking about before with the financial, non-financial goals. If we're looking at you must achieve 30 sales within a month, we could have an IT program that shows constantly how many sales you're at. So if the end of the month is rolling around and you only have 20, the manager can remind somebody, okay, you need to pick it up, or you need to change how you're doing things. Let's correct this now, which goes on to the last one, is continuously take corrective action. If we know what our goals are and we know they're not being achieved, we as managers need to take action in order to be able to correct things before they become problems. All right, defining the employee's goals and performance standards. We have, like I said, sometimes we set the goals for employees. Sometimes the employees help them set their own goals, but we have a lot of different things that we can look at. We as managers, we need to assess attaining numerical goals is one option, where we set a quota. You must meet this quota. You must get up to this certain numerical point. We also have another one, which is meeting quality and quantity criteria. Quality is not usually measured with numbers, but we should be able to show maybe defective units or units that didn't work, or maybe complaints on a certain topic or things like that, it's non-direct numerical. And then we could also focus on mastering competencies. Sometimes our jobs aren't necessarily based on numbers. If you're an IT person, you're not typically gauged on how many computers you fix, because there might not always be a broken computer to be fixing. But sometimes that general knowledge of understanding a certain topic is more important. Understanding how to become a manager, understanding a new product line, things like that. Those are all competencies, but they can't necessarily be measured. So that goes into managers' goals, are what we consider SMART. And this is an acronym. This is goals not only for HR management, but goals pretty much across the board. We should be able to make things five points. They should be specific, They should be measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. Specific in that we actually assign something that we can figure out and that it isn't vague at all. Say your goal is within the next month, you're going to sell 20 products before the end of the month. That is something very specific, as opposed to something that's very vague is your goal is to sell more. Well, what is more? A lot of people, I want to make more money. Well, how much more money? Be specific, that way people can know whether they were successful or not, which feeds into the next one, which is measurable. So we have a very specific goal. Now we should be able to measure it in some way to know whether it was successful or not. Because if it's not measurable and we just said, okay, we want more, well, what does more mean? So if you make a penny more next month, does that mean you're a success? Maybe, maybe not. The next one, attainable. We should make goals that we can get to. We should never make something that is absolutely impossible to get to. I'm not saying don't make them difficult, but they should absolutely not be impossible. They should be relevant. If you're setting a goal for a salesperson, you should not give them a goal based on a production. If you're a salesperson, you shouldn't make a goal as I want to build 10 more products next month, because it isn't your job to build products. So you need to make sure your goals align with what the actual job at hand is, and make sure that they meet what you're trying to get. If you're trying to get more sales next month, it doesn't help you to I don't know, spend 30 more hours in the office whenever your people are not in the office. So make sure that they align with what your job actually is. And then also make them timely. Make sure that there is a time limit on something, whether it be an end of a month, whether it be in the next 6 weeks. Give yourself an end point, or give your employees an end point. That way they know at this date, this is when I should be successful. All right, a couple HR tools for line managers and entrepreneurs. Should a manager tell employees what their goals are, or let them participate in setting the goals? This is just a side project that came with the book, but I want you guys to think about this. In your perspective, should a manager come up with goals in their head and then just give them to an employee, or should an employee participate in making the goals? There's a lot of different situations where some might be appropriate, some might not, but this is ultimately just your idea, your decision of something I want you guys to think about. There is no scientific study that has been successful at showing one is better at performance than the other. So it doesn't come down on expecting better performance one way or the other. They're both pretty much the same, but just in your opinion, what do you think? All right, on to more about appraising, is who should do the appraising. We have several different ways that we can look at, and there's pros and cons to each. The first one is peer appraisals, where you have a set of employees and they appraise each other. You'd get, if there's like 5 people, you'd get one person that reviewed the other 4, then the next person reviewed the other 4. That way you get people that work together all of the time. You get, how do I think my fellow employees perform? And then you can kind of get an estimate. If 4 people said one person was horrible at their job, there's a pretty good likelihood that that person may actually not be good. Is it always going to be accurate? No. There's going to be biases. There's going to be some social context. If somebody's just generally grumpy but good at their job, they may actually receive a bad performance rating by their peers because they make them uncomfortable. So we have to be very careful when we're doing something like this, that we're not seeing the bias coming out in people. We have also what's called a rating committee, where basically there's several different people that interact with an employee, and they all rate them together. One may be the person's direct supervisor, another one may be the person's manager, another one could be a manager from another department that they work with often, or maybe someone outside of the management staff. That way you could get a collection of different people that show different perspectives. Sometimes a supervisor sees only one thing, but a manager or a different department may see it completely different. We have self-ratings, where you as an employee rate yourself and think how you are doing. There is oftentimes, this is going to come, that people always anticipate that they're doing better than they really are. But so we have to take that with a grain of salt. Does that mean that it's necessarily always wrong? No. Yes, people are going to say they do a little bit better than everybody else, but at the same time, they're going to be able to point out things that nobody else is going to either. So this is a valuable tool to have people rate themselves, so you can get that new perspective as well. Appraisal by subordinates. This goes for employees rating their supervisors or managers, so that people can get the upward perspective. If a manager was rating a supervisor, they have a very specific relationship, that the manager is always looking down towards the supervisor. So they may act a very certain way, whereas subordinates looking up at the supervisor look at things a very different way, and they see him as a very different person. So if it's somebody that's over top of other people, it's absolutely acceptable to have subordinates rate them, whether it be on their leadership skills or their organization skills, because they see those skills in action all the time. And the last one on here is 360-degree feedback. This is a combination of everything that's on this page and then some. 360 reviews could involve subordinates, peers, supervisors, outside managers. Sometimes we can pull in customers or vendors, people that aren't even in the company, in order to rate a person, because each one of these relationships shows a different side of a person. Somebody could be horrible manager with their employees, they're distant with their manager, but at the same time they are the best person in the world with their customers. Or they're always on top of getting vendors information and stuff like that. So different people are going to see different sides of the same person. A 360 feedback involves everybody around the person, thus the 360 degree. That way we can get a full perspective of who this person is and how they perform. Alright, so quick review over this. Performance management definition. The biggest thing to remember is that this is a continuous process to identify and measure performance all throughout a year or all throughout a career. We went over the 6 basic elements. I'm not going to rehash all of those all over again. Use IT to automate performance management. If you guys are going into high-scale management, it would be very wise to look at IT solutions to keep track of how things are going, to record numbers and see how progress is going. We talked about performance standards, of setting a standard, then seeing how people rate to that standard. And then we also talked about SMART goals, where we're looking for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely goals to make sure that they're appropriate and make sure that things can get done how they're supposed to. Alright, moving into develop, evaluate, and administer at least 4 performance appraisal tools. Alright, the first one is what's called a graphic rating scale method. And this is the one, if you guys have ever done a review or an appraisal, this is probably the one that you've seen. This is very simply on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, rate how somebody does in this area. Rate how often this person is late for work on a scale of 1 to 10. Rate how this person does in dealing with customers, 1 through 10. This is very, very common because it is cheap, it is quick, and it is easy. But at the same time, because of that, there's a lot of ambiguity as to far as what things mean, because what does a 3 mean to most people? It could mean one thing to me and something else to you, and we'll never know that because it's just a 3. So while this is one of the easiest and quickest, this is oftentimes one of the easiest to have errors with. We also have several other tools that we could do. The first one is alternation ranking, where we take all of our employees and we pick a topic that we want to rank them on. Say it's output, how many products they can put out in a day. We pick the one at the top and we pick the one at the bottom, and that person goes into spot 1 and that person goes into the last spot. Then with whoever's remaining, we pick the top and bottom again. Whoever's remaining, top and bottom. Eventually, we're going to rank an entire department in consecutive order. That way we can rank them and base things on that information. If it's based on who we're giving raises to, maybe we'll only give raises to 10% of the department. What 10% gets it? We would do this alternation ranking and pick the 10% at the top, and that's who we give raises to. Sometimes this is good, sometimes this is bad. Alternation ranking isn't very good if everyone in a department is good. So sometimes we can have that error that maybe it's everybody is good. How do we pick the people on the bottom? We have another one where we do paired comparison, where we pick 2 people and then compare them to each other. It's a bad way to look at it, but basically you take the 2 people, if you have one win, one lose, and you just keep going through this process to find out who is better in all of these certain areas. We also have another one called forced distribution, where it's very similar to alternation ranking. We just have a different way of going about it. Forced distribution says you can have 10% at the top, you can have 10% at the bottom, and 80% in the middle. So we just group people into these categories, and we can have 3 categories, 50 categories if we wanted to, is how we split people up. And then we make decisions based on what group they're in. We have another one that's called critical incident appraisal, where basically this is just as things happen throughout the year, we write them down. And these are called our critical incidents. If we had a customer come in and complain and have a big scene in front of the whole restaurant, that becomes a critical incident. At the same time, if a different customer comes in and praises this employee and says they did so great, that's also a critical incident. That also gets put on file. And anything in between, any distinguishing marks throughout the year, we take note of. And then at the end of the year, we compare a lot of these together. That way we can see the pattern of how things went. We have a timeline of how people acted. Maybe at the beginning of the year, we noticed all of the critical incidents were bad. Towards the end of the year, they were all good. Obviously, that shows that the person has progressed. We also have what's called narrative forms, where basically this is an essay on an employee, basically. All a manager does is fill out a form, sentences and paragraphs and all of that describe the person. And this will give people a lot more perspective on the actual person and require them to give a lot more thought. It isn't necessarily you're a 3 or a 5. It's how does this person react? Tell me about a time. Maybe tell us about a couple critical incidents. And then finally, behavioral anchored rating scales, or bars. It's a combination of narratives, critical incidents, and quantified scales. Basically, what we do is we combine a lot of these things together in order to find a full picture of somebody's performance over a period of time. It's much more accurate. It's much clearer on what we're expecting, just because we can grade people on the narratives, on the critical incidents. We have much more information, but at the same time, it's very costly and very, very time consuming. If you're trying to collect every critical incident in a narrative that employee has had over the last 365 days, it's going to be a lot of information to go through, and then also to scale and rank and do all these other things is going to be rather difficult. We have what's called a mixed standard scale, which is basically the same as bars, but we simplify some of the process down. We only take a certain amount of behavioral examples. We only take a few of the critical incidences. We only take a few of the narratives and use those to calculate things with. We have management by objectives, where we set specific goals, and then we grade somebody specifically on those set goals. This is good for specific numbers. If they said over the course, we want you to meet a quota of 30 sales every month, that's an objective of 30 sales per month. And then we could grade somebody. Did they hit 30 sales every single month? If they missed 1 month, if they missed every month, we can judge them accordingly. And then we also have a couple other just random things. Computerized and web-based performance appraisal. This could be any one of those that we've already talked about. This could be the bars system. This could be a narrative. It's just on a computer. Electronic performance monitoring. Sometimes we can get statistics straight out of people without having to do a lot of work. If we have a system that you put all your sales into, we can just pull up the record and say how many sales has this person had, and it just constantly monitors it for us. The only other different one is what's called conversation days, and these are growing more popular because this is an opportunity for a manager just to sit down with an employee and just talk. There's not going to be rating scales, there's not going to be numbers involved a lot of the time. It's just the opportunity for the manager to sit down and talk over the performance with the employee and find ways to, same thing, improve deficiencies or reinforce strengths. But ultimately, as it says here, using multiple methods. It's one of the most reliable ways that we can get the most out of people. Use a lot of different methods. Maybe we do the bars program at the end of the year, but we do multiple of the other ones throughout the year that are simpler, easier, and don't take as much time to do. Alright, so we went over a lot of different things. The alternation is where we go top to bottom, back to top, back to bottom, and going back and forth. Pairs is just pairing certain people or certain groups together. Forced distribution, where we give people a certain percentage or how many people are allowed to be in each group, and we assign them to that group. Critical incidents, or just major events that happened. Narratives are just written essays about a person. The bars is a combination of incidents and narratives and measuring. And then the few other ones as far as like management by objective that we just went over and everything. Alright, explain and illustrate the problems to avoid when appraising performance. One of the biggest things to remember whenever we're doing performance appraisals is we are all human. So we need to make sure that we avoid some of the problems and make sure that we're doing things fairly. Potential problems whenever we're doing appraisal. The first one is simply unclear standards. If the employee does not know what they are trying to achieve, more than likely they're never going to achieve it. This could be because you were just never told what the standard was. This could have been you didn't understand it whenever it was given to you, things like that. And we need to make sure that we're very clear on what our standards are so that we know our employee knows how to achieve them. The next one is called the halo effect. Basically, this is our own personal feelings towards a person. If, for whatever reason, we like somebody, we're automatically going to think they do a better job than somebody who does the exact same job but we don't like. If we don't like somebody, we all do it as humans. If we don't like somebody, we're going to rate them badly even if they do a great job. On the flip side, if we like somebody, it doesn't matter how poorly they perform, we're still going to think they did better than they actually did. We have what's called a central tendency. That first program that we talked about where you just assign numbers to people. It is very common for people just to go straight threes all the way down the board because everybody is average. There may be a few shining moments here and there, but essentially we all have a tendency to go right down the middle and just assume that everybody is relatively average. We have leniency and strictness, and this is purely based on us as managers. If we are more lenient, we're just going to say that everybody did a great job because it doesn't matter, let everybody do things, everybody did great. On the flip side is strictness, where nobody is correct because nobody's following the rules, or everybody is going to get lower ratings across the board because I'm strict about how I'm doing things. We also have what's called recency effects, where we oftentimes appraise people on the most recent things that have happened. If somebody's had great performance for the past 11 months, but for some reason has irritated you within the last month, we're automatically going to assume the worst of that person. Or they have slacked off within the past couple days before doing the appraisal, that we're going to allow that to cloud our judgment. And we need to find ways to see the whole picture as a whole. That's one of the things about how we talked about the critical incidents, how we're supposed to record things throughout the year. This allows us to get rid of some of the recency effect. Allows us to see things that have happened in the past so we know how to accurately grade them, basically. We also have our own biases. It could be for a lot of different reasons. Some of it is what's above here. But we all have biases about people. We make assumptions about people, or, like I said, about the halo effect. We just assume that somebody is not going to be good at their job because we don't like them, or we don't like their way of doing things. Does that mean that it's wrong? No. So we're going to have biases, and we have to try to push those out. But I want to point out something. If you haven't noticed it already, most of these have to do with the manager and not the employee. Even from the unclear standards. It's our jobs as managers to make the standards clear. The halo effect. How do we feel about somebody else? The central tendency. We have a tendency to think of assuming everybody is average on most things. So all of these are our own personal problems that we have to fight through, not necessarily the employees' problems, but our own. So guidelines for effective appraisal. Know the problems. Know exactly how you're trying to word things. Know exactly how you're trying to shape things so you know how to approach things. Use the right tool. Whether it be a computer tool that measures performance or whether it's your evaluation method. Make sure that you're using the most appropriate for that situation. You could also try keeping a diary, which is similar to the critical incidents. That way you're not prone to only remember the most recent thing that has happened. You'll remember things all throughout the year. I've known a lot of people that have kept a diary on an employee for the entire time that they worked with them. That way they're sure that they have all of the appropriate information. Get an agreement on a plan, whether this be the goals that were set up at the beginning before an appraisal even started. Get the employee to agree with you of what the standard is. Talk to maybe even your hire manager about make sure that this feeds into the company goal and the company strategy. So everybody's in agreement. There's no question about whether this is the right thing to do. Always ensure fairness across the board. Try not to let your own personal feelings get in the way. Make sure that you grade employees equally across the board and fair to everybody. Don't let situations or personal feelings cloud your judgment. And also remember that there are a lot of connections between your appraisals and the law. We talked about this for the equal opportunity. We can't necessarily give somebody decent appraisals across the board for years and then all of a sudden fire somebody for not performing well. That's never going to work. So we have to remember that there are certain things where the law steps in. If somebody ever sues for wrongfully being fired or receiving a bad evaluation on irrelevant information such as gender or ethnicity, a lot of this will come back and they'll read your appraisals to see what you put in there. Was some of it biased? Was some of it racist or sexist or anything like that? Because remember, an employee appraisal can become a legal document, and it represents basically a situation between, or basically a contract between you and your employee. Okay, so a quick review. We have some things where we have unclear standards, where the employee doesn't know exactly what the standards are or we didn't set them up correctly. We have the halo effect, where we make assumptions about how a person performs based on our own opinion. We have a central tendency, where we just seem that most employees are very average at most things. We have the recency effect, where we typically only look at the most recent activity, the most recent events. We have a leniency and strictness, which is just our own way of how we mandate things and how we judge things. And then we also have our own personal biases, which are ideas that are in our head that could affect how we appraise somebody. All right, let's skip over that one. All right, finally, or I don't think this is finally, sorry. Perform an effective appraisal interview. So after you've done an appraisal with an employee or for an employee, eventually you're going to have a conversation with them to review what you put down. It's not simply one of those things that you can just fill out a form, put it into a file, and nobody ever has to look at it again. In order to be effective, we need to have a conversation with the employee. This also comes back to the law. That you could, if you gave somebody bad reviews for years and then fired them on it, but they never saw one of the appraisals, then that's not legal. Oftentimes, when we do an appraisal, we're going to have to sit down with the employee and go over it with them. How to conduct the appraisal interview. The first thing you want to do is prepare before the interview. Obviously, you've already done the appraisal. You want to make sure that you're refreshed on it. You don't want to be reading your own work in front of the employee. So make sure that you prepare ahead of time. And it also goes into the next one, is set together a plan of how the process with this is going to go. As far as plan, this also goes to the interview itself. So you sit an employee down, you start going over your appraisal, and you start talking to them. You also then start to put together a plan moving forward with this employee. Sometimes this could be this is how I see that we can correct some of the problems, or maybe this is how we reinforce some of the things that you're good at. Let's put together a plan, and then also coach the person in order to help them try to achieve it. Show that you're with them and you support them, and that you want them to be successful, and find ways to get them to push past barriers, find ways to capitalize on what they're good at, and strengthen what they're not good at. And then finally, be objective. You don't want to get personal during an interview. You don't want to start pointing fingers. You don't want to start blaming people. Oftentimes, you also don't even want to talk about specific examples, or even give the impression that you're blaming somebody. Instead of saying something like, your performance wasn't up to par in this level, say something was, performance was only at 75% of where it's supposed to be, and let them fill in the gap that they're part of that performance. That way, it takes some of the attack out of it, because a lot of people, whenever they give a performance interview, they feel under attack. People get defensive whenever they're in these interviews because people are often telling them they did something wrong. They could go the entire time since the last appraisal and think they're doing great, and then figure out during the interview that they're not doing that great, so they're automatically going to become defensive. Try to break down that defense by not blaming people. How to conduct the appraisal interview. There are several types of appraisal interviews. It just depends on what your intention is with this person. There's three main types. The first one is satisfactory and promotable. This is one that everything is going great, and we want to start preparing this person to move up within the company. This is a very easy interview because people are usually happy during these interviews, because they see potential, and you see potential in them. So this is one that you're going to build a plan of. This is how we groom you into becoming what we want you to be. There's another type which is satisfactory but not promotable. This is basically one of those, you're doing a good job at what you're doing now, but we don't basically have any intention of moving you up at this time. This could change by the next time, but we're not going to put together those plans of grooming somebody into a new position. We're going to find ways to strengthen what they're already doing. We know they're a good employee. Maybe they're good at what they're doing, but maybe not something else. So let's find ways to make them even better at what they're doing right now. There's another one, which is unsatisfactory but correctable. This is one that is going to be a lot more of correction than anything else, because you have to put together a plan of how do you fix some of the things that this person may not be great at or is not doing what they're supposed to. But with this, make sure that you're being supportive and putting together an action plan so this person can become up to par. Like I said, this is unsatisfactory, but it's correctable problems. And the last one is unsatisfactory and uncorrectable. At this point, this may be a point where you start phasing somebody out. It's not always the best way to look at it, but there are a lot of problems that are not going to be able to be fixed. We have to let somebody know this. We have to do our due diligence to do what we can, but this may be the start of the process to have them leave. And this does happen. We don't like this to happen, but a bad appraisal that we don't see that the problems could be fixed could just be the first step of having the person leave for whatever reason. All right, how to conduct the appraisal interview. First thing, use objective data. Don't use your own personal feelings. Don't use things that can't be proven, things like that. That way, objective data, it's very by the numbers, very straightforward. If somebody else were to look at the exact same numbers, they'd get the exact same reaction. Don't let it get personal. Don't blame people. Don't get angry. Try to be supportive. I'm not saying be completely impersonal, but don't let your feelings get the best of you. Don't attack somebody. Encouragement. Make sure that you're encouraging the person to do better or encourage them to continue to doing what they're good at. Especially ones that they're satisfactory but not promotable. Encourage them to continue to do good job. This will help support them and empower them to want to continue to do it. And then finally, we also want an agreement, especially if we're putting together a plan moving forward. You want the employee to be on board with the plan as well, so you agree upon it. And oftentimes, whether it be the plan or even the appraisal itself, you'll get the person to agree to what was talked about. Most performance appraisals, there's a place for the employee to sign says they accept this review. So that's also another form of an agreement. But so that agreement part means a lot of different things. But we want to make sure that whenever the employee leaves, both the manager and the employee are on the same page and they agree of what happens next. Managing the appraisal interview. Sometimes these can get a little out of hand, especially the negative appraisals. Sometimes we have to handle a defensive subordinate. Like I said, if you give somebody bad information, most people's first reaction is to become defensive. We have to be able to understand that and try to mediate some of that. People are going to get emotional, but we want to be able to pull it back down, try not to make the people feel they're being attacked. So if somebody's not being attacked, they're not going to be as defensive. We want to stay away from criticizing a subordinate. Remember, we're trying to be supportive here. We want them to succeed because if they succeed, we succeed. So we want to stay away from criticizing or pointing fingers or casting blame whenever we're in this interview. We want to be encouraging. We want to fix problems, not instigate them. A formal written warning. Like I said, sometimes whether it's an unsatisfactory but correctable or an unsatisfactory and uncorrectable, sometimes we're going to have to issue warnings that things are not good. If things don't correct, we're going to have to split ways. This is letting go of somebody should never be a split-second decision, and it should always be based on a process. So this appraisal could be the first step in that process. Sometimes we do have to issue warnings so that people know that it's coming and it's never a surprise. Especially the ones that we're not going to be able to correct the problem. We need to start the process. That way this isn't going to come back and turn around on us. And then also finally, realistic appraisals. We want to make sure that whenever we're giving somebody evaluations, that we're not evaluating on something that isn't humanly possible. If we cannot see that somebody can perform at put out more products in a month, we can't just expect them to work another 50 hours a week in order to achieve that higher level. Or we can't just automatically assume that things are going to happen or things are going to change. We have to be very realistic, or else the next time we have an appraisal, it's going to be bad too. Alright, so a quick review is how to conduct an appraisal interview. Remember that we're looking for the best way to relay our information. We're looking to encourage somebody and we're looking to support them. And then also managing the appraisal interview. We talked about different types that sometimes there's satisfactory or unsatisfactory. Some about promotions. Some people are not promotable, in different forms of correction for the unsatisfactory. And we have to deal with some of the negative sides of giving a performance appraisal and figuring out how we're supposed to deal with that. How are we supposed to turn somebody that is defensive during one of these interviews into an ally that we're going to get something more out of them after the interview? All right. And explain how to segment employees for appraisal and reward purposes. Talent management oriented employers do use performance appraisal to evaluate how their employees are performing. However, segmenting employees based on how critical the employees are in the company will sometimes change how we approach different types of appraisals. Take, for instance, one of the ways that a lot of companies do it is based upon how critical the employee is to the company, and also based on how their performance is with it, or how much potential the employee has. Take, for instance, if you're a software engineering company and you're doing an appraisal for one of your software engineers, more than likely they're very critical to your company and you need them in your company. But it just depends on the employee as to whether they have potential to move forward or they don't have potential. And that determines how much we invest in this person and how much we let them do their own thing. Take, for instance, if we have somebody that even so much as a custodian, he would usually not be considered overly critical to the operation as a whole, but he may have great potential. Maybe we still can motivate him in certain ways by giving him appraisals and plans in order to move forward. So we have this different ways of grouping people based on these two factors. That way we can evaluate them as a whole and figure out ways to best optimize them. Because part of the appraisal process was setting standards. We can set different standards based on where they fall within our organizational segments. But just a quick review. Sometimes it does take to setting up segments within our company to know how we're going to review them, how we're going to pay them, how we're going to motivate them, and then how do we manage the performance of those different groups, because we're going to have to invest in them differently. We're going to have to set different standards for them, and how do we do our best to help them move forward. All right, so that is it for Chapter 9. I will see you guys in Chapter 10.